Georgia has boundaries that ordinary people can only stand outside and look at. Some places are off limits because they are too fragile for human feet to touch. Some are forbidden because behind their gates lie science, the military, or systems of critical importance. And some look completely ordinary on a map, but the moment you cross their boundary, they stop belonging to the public. These are 10 forbidden places in Georgia you're not allowed to visit. Let's get started right now. Number 10, Egg Island Bar Natural Area. What if one of the most forbidden places in Georgia looked like absolutely nothing at all? No concrete walls, no guards, no razor wire, just a lonely strip of sand sitting out in the coastal wind. This isolated sandbar sits off the coast of McIntosh County, Georgia. And yet, the moment you step onto Egg Island Bar, you are no longer a visitor. You are the disturbance. That is what makes this place so strange. Egg Island Bar Natural Area does not look dangerous, secretive, or important in the way most people imagine a forbidden place should. From a distance, it looks almost disposable, like a quiet sandbar the world forgot to name. But Georgia did not forget it. The state closed it off for a reason, and that reason says a lot about what forbidden can really mean. Unlike a military base or a federal prison, this place is not off limits because it hides some classified operation. It is off limits because life here depends on people staying away. Egg Island Bar is one of Georgia's protected bird islands, and public access is banned because that exposed stretch of sand functions as critical nesting and resting habitat for seabirds and shorebirds. What looks empty to us is, for them, one of the most important places on the coast. And that silence is fragile. Barrier sandbars like this work because they are isolated, away from roads, crowds, and many land predators. That isolation gives birds a chance to nest and raise young in relative safety. But the same thing that makes the island perfect also makes it easy to damage. One person landing there at the wrong moment can flush adult birds off their nests. Eggs and chicks are suddenly left exposed to heat, stress, and predators. A few careless minutes can wreck an entire breeding cycle. So Georgia made the rule simple. No public entry, not just during the wrong season, not just unless you promise to be careful, no entry at all. That is why Egg Island Bar belongs on this list. It proves that some places are forbidden, not because humans built something powerful there, but because nature did. And on this stretch of Georgia coast, the state decided that whatever is happening on that bare strip of sand matters more than your right to step onto it. Number 9. St. Catherine's Island, the island's interior. Some forbidden places warn you with fences, checkpoints, or men with rifles. St. Catherine's Island does something more unsettling. It looks beautiful first. Long, quiet, and set off Georgia's coast in Liberty County, about 50 miles south of Savannah. It feels less like a place that rejects people and more like a place that simply drifted away from them. And that is exactly what makes it work so well in this list. Because from a distance, St. Catherine's does not look off limits. It looks untouched, it looks peaceful. It looks like the kind of island you could disappear into for an afternoon and never want to leave. But the closer you get, the stranger the line becomes. The beach itself can be reached by private boat in some cases, which makes the island feel almost accessible. Almost, because the part people actually want to wander into, the shaded interior beyond the sand, is not open to the public. That is where St. Catherine's changes from a pretty barrier island into something much more compelling. It is a private preserve and research site, and the island's inner world has been kept closed off to protect what survives there, both natural and human. In other words, you are allowed to touch the edge of the story. You are not allowed to walk inside it. And there is a reason the boundary holds so firm. This island is not protecting one thing, it is protecting layers. St. Catherine's contains delicate coastal ecosystems, but it also holds thousands of years of human history. Researchers have studied about 6,000 years of life on the island, and one of its most important chapters was Mission Santa Catalina de Gual, a major Spanish mission site. Archaeologists uncovered churches, a cemetery, wells, living areas, and an extraordinary record of the people who lived, worked, worshipped, and were buried there. More than 1 million artifacts have been recovered from the island over time. This is not just preserved land, it is preserved memory. That is what makes St. Catherine's feel so forbidden in such a quiet way. No one has to dramatize it. The island does that on its own. You can reach the shoreline and still be kept outside the part that matters most. You can look at the trees, the marsh, the deeper interior, and know that beyond that point, the island belongs to research, history, and the fragile balance that kept it alive this long. Some places are closed because they hide power. St. Catherine's is closed because it holds too much that cannot be replaced, and that may be an even stronger reason to stay out. Number 8. Wolf Island National Wildlife Refuge. There are forbidden places that keep people out with fences and threats. Wolf Island does it in a quieter way, which somehow makes it feel even more off limits. Sitting about 12 miles east of Darien off the Georgia coast, this is not the kind of island you casually wander onto. It is remote, low, wind-beaten, and surrounded by the kind of saltwater landscape that already feels like it belongs to something older than us. And that first impression matters, because Wolf Island does not look like a place built for visitors. It looks like a place that was never meant to need them in the first place. That is where the line gets interesting. The waters around the refuge are still open to people. You can boat through them, you can fish there, you can crab there, you can even watch wildlife from the water. But the moment your curiosity turns toward the land itself, the rules harden. The beach is closed, the marsh is closed, the uplands are closed. In other words, you are allowed to circle the story, but you are not allowed to step inside it. And the reason is bigger than one island. Wolf Island National Wildlife Refuge was established in 1930 as a sanctuary for migratory birds, and later in 1975, the entire refuge was designated a national wilderness area. That tells you everything about the logic here. This place was not set aside to entertain people. It was set aside so natural systems could keep working with as little human disturbance as possible. The refuge includes Wolf Island, Egg Island, and Little Egg Island, covering more than 5,000 acres, with over 3/4 of it made up of salt marsh. That means what looks empty from a boat is actually a living network of nesting, feeding, and shelter habitat. And it is busy in ways most people never see. Brown pelicans use it, least terns use it, piping plovers and red knots pass through. Loggerhead, sea turtles, and diamondback terrapins depend on this stretch of coast too. So Wolf Island is not closed because somebody is hiding something there. It is closed because too much is already happening there without us. That is what makes this island so effective in a countdown like this. You can approach it, you can drift beside it, you can look straight at the beach from your boat and still be completely outside, the world that matters. At Wolf Island, the forbidden part is not a building, a bunker, or a gate. It is the land itself. And Georgia decided that land should stay wild enough to reject you. Number 7, FCI Atlanta. FCI Atlanta does not hide out in some empty desert or behind a mountain road. It sits in southeast Atlanta, right inside the gravity of a major American city. And that is what makes it so unsettling, because most forbidden places feel far away. This one feels close enough to pass on a normal day without ever realizing that just beyond those walls is a world the public does not simply enter. The address is public. The institution is public. But access is not. That is the first thing that makes FCI Atlanta work in a countdown like this. It is not forbidden because nobody knows where it is. It is forbidden because knowing where it is changes nothing. The Bureau of Prisons describes it as a low-security federal correctional institution with a detention center, which means this is not some retired site frozen in the past. It is an active federal facility, still operating, still controlled, and still built around one idea. The people outside do not move through this place on their own terms, and the rules make that painfully clear. You do not just show up and ask to visit. The Bureau says it outright. To visit a federal inmate, you must be pre-approved. You can only visit if the inmate has placed you on their visiting list and you have been cleared by the BOP. That sounds procedural, but that procedure is the whole point. At FCI Atlanta, the gate does not open because you came a long way, because you know someone, or because you are curious. It opens only if the system has already decided your name belongs there. That is what gives this place its particular kind of tension. It is a locked federal world sitting in the middle of ordinary city life. Cars move, streets stay busy, Atlanta keeps going. But inside FCI Atlanta, every entry is controlled, every visit is filtered, and every step past the threshold belongs to federal rules, not public freedom. Some forbidden places feel remote because geography protects them. FCI Atlanta is different. It feels forbidden because it proves that even in the middle of a city, there are places you can point to on a map and still never truly reach. Number 6. CDC Roybal Campus, Atlanta. Everybody knows the name CDC. That is what makes this place so effective on a list like this. The Edward R. Roybal campus is not hidden in the woods or buried behind some anonymous government label. It sits in Atlanta with a real address, a real entrance, and a name the entire country recognizes. And yet that familiarity is exactly the trap. Because the more famous the CDC is, the more people assume they understand it. In reality, most people only know the idea of CDC. The part they are most curious about sits behind controlled access. That is where the line starts to feel strange. The closest thing the public has to an official window into the campus is the David J. Sensor CDC Museum. But even that small window is tightly managed. Right now, the museum is temporarily closed, and CDC says that when it reopens, visitors will still need advance reservations. No walk-ins will be allowed. Adults will need real ID or a passport, and all vehicles and bags will be inspected. Even the part built to educate the public begins at a security gate. So if the museum is that controlled, it tells you something about the campus behind it. And that campus is not just office space. After the security changes that followed September 11th and the anthrax attacks, the expanded Roybal campus opened in 2005 with a new headquarters building, new laboratories, and the Global Communications Center. CDC materials also describe the agency's Emergency Operations Center as a state-of-the-art health security command center at headquarters in Atlanta, running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In other words, the part people cannot casually enter is the part where health, security, lab work, communications, and emergency response come together. The mystery here is not theatrical, it is structural. That is what makes Roybal feel forbidden in such a modern way. There may be no dramatic myth around it, but there does not need to be. CDC's own Office of Safety, Security, and Asset Management oversees a safe and secure workplace and internal emergency response for the agency. So this is not a campus the public simply wanders through because they know the name on the sign. At Roybal, the contradiction is the whole story. You can know exactly where it is, you can know exactly what it does, but the part that feels most important, the working heart of the place, remains on the other side of access control. Number 5. Plant Vogtle Reactor Site, Burke County. You expect a forbidden place to look like a bunker, a missile field, or some military zone scrubbed from the map. Plant Vogtle is more unsettling than that because it looks like something the modern world cannot live without. Sitting in Burke County near Waynesboro, close to the Savannah River and the South Carolina line, it is one of the most important pieces of energy infrastructure in Georgia. And that is exactly why the most sensitive parts of it are not for ordinary people. Vogtle does not need secrecy to feel off limits. It gets that feeling from scale, function, and the fact that what happens inside matters far beyond the fence. That is where this place changes from power plant to something much more controlled. At nuclear sites like Vogtle, not every area is treated the same. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission's records describe protected areas and vital areas where access is restricted to personnel with unescorted access authorization. In plain English, that means there are layers inside the site that a normal visitor does not just walk into, and even many workers do not move through freely unless they have been specifically cleared for it. So the real line here is not just the outer boundary, it gets tighter the deeper you go. And the reason for that line is coldly practical. This is not military secrecy. This is nuclear security. The NRC states that anyone seeking unescorted access to a nuclear power plant must go through background checks and fingerprinting for an FBI identification and criminal history check. That detail matters because it tells you how the system sees this place. It is not enough to work nearby. It is not enough to be familiar with the site. If you want to move unescorted through the most sensitive parts of a nuclear facility, the government wants to know exactly who you are first. That is what makes Plant Vogtle such a strong number 5. Georgia Power calls it the largest generator of clean energy in the United States, and with all the 4 units operating, it stands less like a hidden compound and more like a protected nerve center for the grid. The tension comes from that contrast. Everybody understands, in a broad sense, what a power plant does, but the parts you would most want to see, the parts that make the place feel powerful, are exactly the parts designed to stay beyond your reach. At Vogtle, the Forbidden Zone is not built around mystery. It is built around the reality that some systems are too important to leave casually open. Number 4. Fort Stewart and Hunter Army. Airfield. Fort Stewart and Hunter Army Airfield do not feel forbidden because they are hidden. They feel forbidden because they are right there. One spreads across southeast Georgia near Hinesville. The other sits close to Savannah. You can know their names, drive the roads around them, and see the edges of military life from the outside. But that is the point. These places are not secret. They are simply not yours to enter. And sometimes that feels even heavier. That is what makes this pair such a strong turn in the list. Up to this point, Georgia's forbidden places could still be explained through preservation, research, or infrastructure. Fort Stewart and Hunter Army Airfield moved the story into something more direct. National security has a visible border here. The line between outside and inside is not symbolic. It sits at the gate, and once you reach it, curiosity stops mattering. Access is no longer about interest. It is about authorization. The rule is blunt. If you do not have a military ID, you must go to the Visitor Control Center, and a background check has to be completed before you can enter. All personnel gaining access to Fort Stewart and Hunter Army Airfield are required to have either a military ID or a visitor pass. Even visitors 18 and older must present valid identification and clear the screening process before a pass is issued. That detail matters because it changes the feeling of the place. You are not walking into a public space with extra rules. You are approaching a military installation where entry begins with vetting, and these are not minor facilities tucked into the system as somewhere. Fort Stewart and Hunter Army Airfield are described by Military OneSource as the Army's world-class training and armored power projection combination on the eastern seaboard, a platform built to help units deploy rapidly around the world. So the access control is not there for atmosphere, it is there because these places are active parts of how military power moves. That is why this entry lands so well at number 4. You can look at Fort Stewart or Hunter from the outside and think the line ahead is just a gate, just a checkpoint, just a pause before the road continues. But it is more than that. It is the moment ordinary public space ends and a controlled military world begins. And unless the system decides you belong on the other side, that is where your story stops. Number 3, Fort Eisenhower, Augusta. What makes this place feel forbidden is not that it is hidden. It is that you can know exactly where it is and still have no real idea what is happening inside. On the edge of Augusta, this massive Army installation sits out in plain sight, close enough to roads, neighborhoods, and everyday life that it does not feel remote at all. That is what makes it work. Because the closer a place feels to the ordinary world, the stranger it becomes when that world stops at the gate. And at this gate, it does. You can drive toward it, you can recognize the name, You can point to it on a map, but the moment you try to cross from public space into military space, the whole feeling changes. Part of the mystery here comes from the name itself. Many people still think of it through its recent Fort Eisenhower chapter, even though the Army has now returned the installation to the name Fort Gordon. But whatever name you attach to it, the effect is the same. This is not just another post with barracks and training grounds. It is the home of the Army's Cyber Center of Excellence, the place tied to cyberspace operations, signal and communications networks, information services, and electronic warfare. In other words, this is the kind of military power you do not necessarily see when you look at a gate or a road sign. You only feel the edges of it, and the rules make those edges very clear. If you are not DoD personnel and you are 18 or older, you do not just roll in because you are curious. You need a favorable background check and a visitor pass. In fact, every adult in the vehicle must clear screening before unescorted access is allowed. The installation's pass system uses an NCIC-3 background check tied to FBI criminal history data, which means entry begins with vetting, not with explanation. That detail matters because it tells you exactly what kind of place this is. The system does not care whether you know the name, it cares whether you belong there. That is why this entry lands so high on the list. Fort Gordon, in its recent Fort Eisenhower era and beyond, feels more modern, more closed, and more opaque than the classic image of a military base. It is not just about soldiers moving through a secured installation. It is about communications, cyber, and the kind of invisible military functions most outsiders will never really see. Even the air above it is controlled, with the installation warning that it is a no-drone zone. So this is not just a place you are kept out of, it is a place you can recognize, name, and still never truly reach. Number 2. Fort Benning, near Columbus. Some forbidden places feel powerful because they are hidden. Fort Benning feels powerful because it is not. You can find it on the map near Columbus, right along the Georgia-Alabama line. You can know the name, chances are you have heard the name for years, and that is exactly what makes it work so well this high on the list, because Fort Benning is not some mystery no one can locate. It is something more unsettling than that. It is a place the public can recognize instantly but still cannot enter on ordinary terms. That contrast is the whole story. Fort Benning is one of the Army's most recognizable installations, a place tied to infantry, armor, airborne, rangers, and officer training. It is not just a military base in the generic sense. It is one of the Army's premier training centers, a place built around preparing soldiers and leaders for combat. So the fame of the name does not make the place more open. It makes the gate feel heavier. Because the more public the reputation is, the stranger it becomes when access is still tightly controlled. And that control is very real. If you do not have a military ID, you do not simply drive in because you know where the post is. Adults who want unescorted access must clear a favorable background check and obtain a visitor pass first. In practice, that means the system looks at you before it lets you look at anything inside. Even the process of requesting entry runs through screening tied to criminal history checks. So the line at Fort Benning is not just a paint barrier on the road, it is a formal decision about whether you belong on the other side of it. That is what gives Fort Benning its weight. This place carries both symbol and authority at the same time. It is famous enough to feel familiar, but controlled enough to remind you that familiarity means nothing here. You can drive near it, see the signs, and understand that something important is happening beyond the gate. But understanding that is as far as most people will ever get. And maybe that is why Fort Benning lands so hard near the top. It represents a very specific kind of forbidden place. Not one hidden from the world, but one standing in plain sight, carrying a public name, a military legacy, and a level of access control that makes one thing clear. Knowing where it is does not bring you any closer to getting in. Number 1. Naval Submarine Base, Kings Bay, Camden County. You expect the most forbidden place in Georgia to be hidden somewhere deep inland behind miles of forest or desert. Kings Bay is more unnerving than that because it sits in plain reality. In Camden County near St. Mary's, close to Interstate 95 and the Intracoastal Waterway, Naval Submarine Base Kings Bay is easy to place on a map. And that is exactly what makes it feel so heavy. You can know where it is, you can drive near it, you can understand, in the broadest sense, what kind of installation it is. But none of that brings you any closer to the world behind the gate. Because Kings Bay is not just another military base. The Navy describes it as the East Coast home to Trident nuclear-powered submarines, and its history page explains that the site was chosen as the East Coast base for the Ohio-class Trident force. Today, Kings Bay supports 6 ballistic missile submarines and 2 guided missile submarines. That alone gives it a different kind of gravity. This is not a place associated with ordinary military movement. It is tied to strategic deterrence, the quiet kind of power that matters most when nobody is talking about it. And the base is built to protect much more than docks and hulls. Kings Bay's own history points to the creation of 3 major commands there: the Trident Training Facility, the Trident Refit Facility, and Strategic Weapons Facility Atlantic. That last one matters most for the feeling of this place. The Navy says Strategic Weapons Facility Atlantic provides strategic missiles and strategic weapons system support to the Fleet Ballistic Missile Submarine Fleet, and it handles the D-5 missile and related components inside a massive complex. So when you picture Kings Bay, you are not picturing one fenced compound. You are picturing an entire support system built around some of the most sensitive hardware in the American arsenal. That is why Kings Bay lands at number 1. Public tours are not offered to ordinary visitors, and even the sky above the base is treated differently. The FAA maintains Prohibited Area P50 over Kings Bay, a continuously protected block of airspace extending from the surface to just under 3,000 feet MSL. That detail changes everything. It means the security of this place is not just horizontal. It rises above the base itself. At Kings Bay, the message is unmistakable. The road stops at the gate, the tour stops before it starts, and even the air knows this is not a place for the public. And maybe that is what makes these places so fascinating. Not just because they are off limits, but because each one reveals a different kind of boundary. Some are closed to protect fragile wildlife. Some are sealed off by science, security, or federal control. And others stand behind gates because what happens inside matters far more than public curiosity ever could. Together, they show that Georgia is not just highways, beaches, and small towns. It is also a state full of invisible lines, places you can find on a map but never truly step into. So now I want to hear from you. Which of these forbidden places surprised you the most? And if you had to pick one location from this list to learn more about, which one would it be? Drop it in the comments. And if you enjoy videos like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay with us for the next countdown.